Hey there. Tonight we're doing something a little softer, a little sweeter. We're slipping quietly into the spring fog of 1855 London, where love unfolds like pressed flowers in a book, silent, delicate, and completely untouched. If you've ever wondered how someone could fall in love without ever holding hands, without so much as a brush of fingertips, then this is your story. And if you're listening from under warm blankets somewhere far away, whether in Boston or Bangkok, Canberra, or Hanoi, leave a comment if you'd like. It always warms my heart to know where in the world these sleepy stories are reaching. And hey, only if you feel like it. Go ahead and tap that like button or subscribe if you'd like to hear more slow, winding stories like this. There's no pressure. Just breathe, settle in, and let's wander back in time together. Because love, real love, doesn't always start with a kiss. Sometimes it begins with a look. You are Lillian Hartley, 18 years old. Your family's townhouse stands tucked behind a black iron gate, just south of the Thames, where the air smells of coal soot, river damp, and something faintly metallic like warm pennies after rain. It's a Tuesday morning, and a pale, drifting mist hangs over Kensington Gardens, softening the edges of the gravel paths, and the tulip beds just beginning to open for the season. You're walking with your mother, arm in arm, your pace measured to hers. Your gloves are white cotton, clean, but fraying slightly at the edges. The bonnet tied beneath your chin is last season's shape, just a little too wide, but she says it still suits you, and you nod, knowing how tight things have been lately. The Hartleys aren't poor exactly, but your father's trade in fine ledgers and account books has seen better seasons. What you are in the eyes of Victorian London is comfortable, a word that means you can keep a maid, but not a carriage. You're not thinking of any of this as you step through the wrought iron gate into the gardens. Your attention is on the way the morning fog glows gold, where the sun finds it, and the crunch of gravel underfoot, and the rustling wing-beat of a pigeon startled from its perch. And then there he is, a man, alone on a bench under a flowering chestnut tree, his coat dark against the pale green buds above him. He's reading, a real leather-bound book, not a newspaper. He's too well-groomed to be working class, too solitary to be one of the usual sauntering gentlemen. Just still. You don't mean to look at him. Not really. But your eyes catch his as you pass. And for 1/2 second longer than polite, but not long enough to scold, he holds your gaze. Then he tips his head slightly forward. A nod, a tiny movement. And you, trained by 100 etiquette manuals and glances from your mother, do something you've never done before. You let your head tilt back just a breath, almost an answer. Nothing more is said. You walk on. But that moment, brief and unspeakably improper in the right drawing rooms, sits with you all day, while your mother chats about ribbons in Bond Street shop windows, while Mary the maid pins your dress for tea, while you try half-heartedly to embroider a lily that keeps coming out crooked. It's not the man's face you remember, not really. It's the way the fog caught in his collar, the slope of his shoulders, the steadiness of his gaze. You don't know his name. You don't expect to see him again. But the moment lingers. In Victorian society, a lady's virtue was her currency, and that meant guarding even her thoughts. But the world was changing slowly. Books like Etiquette for Ladies and the Ladies' Manual of Politeness, sold in little stationers' shops all over London, outlining exactly how to look, move, and even breathe when in public. According to those guides, the proper way to acknowledge an unfamiliar gentleman was no acknowledgement at all. A lowered gaze, a quickened step. Anything more could be misinterpreted, or worse, remembered. And yet young women found ways to speak without words. An angled parasol, a dropped glove, a glance held just long enough to register intent before propriety yanked it away again. Historians still argue whether these silent communications were conscious rebellions or simply learned rhythms of a culture obsessed with restraint. Either way, they were meaningful. That evening, as your father dozes off in the chair beside the fire, and your mother writes a letter to your Aunt Clara in Bath, you climb the creaking stairs to your bedroom. You wash your face with rosewater brush, your hair the recommended 100 strokes, and slip into a cotton nightgown so worn it's become soft as breath. As the candle flickers on your nightstand, you open your little notebook, not the official one you keep for guests, or Sunday school notes, but the one tucked under your pillow. And without knowing quite why you sketch the outline of a park bench. Nothing fancy, just a hint of fog in a coat collar and the edge of a book. Then you blow out the candle and lie back, your hands folded on your stomach, like the portraits in St. Martin's Chapel. You're not in love. Not yet. That would be ridiculous. But your heart feels a little fuller than usual. And in a world where women were expected to feel nothing until marriage made it respectable, even that is a quiet rebellion. The next day you return to the park. Not on purpose, of course. You simply suggest to your mother that the flower beds at Kensington might be blooming early this year, and wouldn't it be nice to stretch your legs? She agrees, unaware of the thrum beneath your calm words. But the bench is empty. A little embarrassed by how disappointed you feel, you take a slower walk than usual. You trail your fingers along the damp railing of a bridge, nod at a woman passing with 2 children, and try to forget the man whose name you never knew. By the time you return home, the sun has burned through the fog. You feel flushed with effort, but not unhappy. After all, that's all it was, a glance. One look on a Tuesday morning in April. Only later that evening, as you tidy the books in the drawing room, do you notice something peculiar. There on the shelf, wedged slightly out of place between Waverley and the Pilgrim's Progress, is a small book you've never seen before. A slim volume bound in green cloth with no title on the spine. You open it carefully. The inscription inside the cover is unsigned, but the words, it's a single poem written in careful hand, and the ink is still a little fresh. You stare at it for a long time. Then, without a word, you tuck it behind Waverley, straighten the row, and walk upstairs. That night, the dream you have is of mist and benches and hands that never quite reach. And so it begins. The weather changes on Thursday. Rain sweeps across the rooftops in long, steady lines, drumming a rhythm on the parlor windows and soaking the cobbled streets until they shine like black marble. You sit at your embroidery frame most of the morning, trying to make progress on a forget-me-not pattern that keeps unraveling every time your thoughts wander, which lately is often. Your mother doesn't comment, though you catch her watching you a little more closely than usual, especially when you pause for longer than you should, needle in the air, staring off into nothing. You do not return to Kensington Gardens that day. It would look too intentional, too eager. And besides, no one strolls in this kind of weather, unless they have a dog or a death wish. But Friday dawns clear and bright, with a breeze soft enough to lift the edge of your curtain before you're even fully awake. You rise early, braid your hair carefully, and choose your pale gray walking dress, the one with the neat pleated hem and tiny pearl buttons that always seem to catch the light just so. You don't ask to go to the park this time. Instead, you wait, and at precisely 10:30, your mother announces she could do with a walk before the butcher delivers the weekend roast. You nod agreeably, as though the thought hadn't already occupied most of your week. You choose your parasol with care, not the new one with the lace fringe that would be too obvious, but the older cream-colored one, the one with the soft muslin panel that glows in sunlight. You remember what the etiquette books say. A lady's parasol is not only for shade, but for signaling. There's a whole language to it, in fact. A parasol tipped slightly to the right signals interest. To the left, indifference. Resting it on the shoulder says, I'm being watched. Resting it on the hip says, please keep your distance. It's all maddeningly precise and more than a little absurd, and yet here you are rehearsing it like a school lesson in your mind. You and your mother take the same path as before. The gravel crunches beneath your boots. The spring sun warms the back of your neck. And as you near the bend beneath the chestnut trees, yes, there, he's there, Edward Wexley, sitting in the same spot with the same book in hand. But today he isn't reading. He's watching, not rudely, not openly, just quietly, like someone who's been hoping the weather might clear again. As you approach, you tilt your parasol to the right, only slightly, just enough. He nods, the same small gesture, then lowers his gaze. That's all. You keep walking. Your mother doesn't notice, or if she does, she says nothing. But you feel it. Something has shifted, not in the world exactly, but in the air around you. It's as if the moment has acquired weight. That afternoon, you polish the silver. It's not really your chore. Mary usually handles it, but you offer anyway under the pretense of helping, before your aunt's visit on Sunday. In truth, you need something rhythmic, something to occupy your hands while your mind drifts back to that bench. The way his coat caught the sun, the way he held his book like it was more habit than necessity. You wonder if he noticed the parasol, or if he only imagined it. You wonder what he thought of your gray dress, or if he recognized the subtle change in the way you walked slower, more deliberate. Historians still debate whether Victorian women were truly as repressed as etiquette books suggest, or whether they learned to thrive within the confines of their society by mastering its unwritten rules. What's clear is that for many women, communication required creativity. Body language became ballet, clothing became code. Even silence, when wielded with precision, became powerful. That evening, you sit at your desk before dinner and take out a clean sheet of paper. You don't write a letter. You're not brave enough for that, not yet. But you copy down a passage from Byron that's been echoing in your mind all day. She walks in beauty like the night, of cloudless climes and starry skies. You fold the page carefully, then tuck it into the back of your poetry book, just in case. 2 days later, on another walk, you see him again. This time, he's walking two alone, of course, and on the opposite path. When he sees you, he lifts his hat. Just a few inches. The movement is precise, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching for it. You dip your head in return, keeping your expression perfectly neutral. Your mother once again says nothing. You keep your parasol angled exactly the same way. It becomes a pattern, these silent exchanges, never quite predictable but regular enough that they begin to form a rhythm in your life. Like the tolling of the church bell down the street, or the soft clatter of hooves outside your window on market day. His presence becomes familiar, comforting, and yet still unknown. You don't know his name yet. That comes later. For now, he is just the man with the book, and the quiet gaze and the knowing nod. And that's enough. That's more than most women your age can say about anyone outside their immediate family. You begin to plan your walks with a little more care. You choose your gloves based on the weather, but also based on how well they match your parasol. You braid your hair in ways that feel prettier, even if no one compliments you. You don't do this for attention. Not exactly. You do it because it feels like participation, like adding your part to a conversation only the two of you can hear. There's a tidbit from a lesser-known etiquette guide published anonymously in 1849 that you once found amusing, but now understand deeply. It said, "A woman may speak volumes with her parasol provided she holds it at the right angle and the right hour." You used to laugh at that. Now it feels like prophecy. One afternoon, while adjusting a rose in the front parlor vase, you spot him across the street. He's not looking toward your window, but he's walking slowly, slower than necessary, as though he's allowing time for something to happen. You don't wave. Of course not. But you do remain near the window longer than you need to, and when he disappears around the corner, you let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Later that evening, while setting the table, you find yourself humming. A simple tune. Something your nursemaid used to sing. You don't realize it's the same rhythm as your footsteps in the park. Until your mother comments, "That's a sweet little thing you've got stuck in your head." You shrug, say something about the weather, but you can't help smiling. These things, the parasol, the glance, the unspoken acknowledgement, are not love. Not yet. But they are the architecture of possibility, the scaffolding that will hold whatever comes next. That night you dream again, not of kisses or embraces, but of shadows and sunshine, of walking paths and wool coats, of silence that speaks. And in the distance always the flick of a parasol angled just so. It's Monday when the note appears. You're in Bell & Suiter's, a small bookshop tucked between a milliner's and a wine merchant just off Fleet Street. It's not your usual stop, but your mother needed ribbon and decided to walk the longer way home. While she examines lace trims near the window, you wander past the shelves in the back, fingers brushing spines that smell of dust and dye and quiet afternoons. It's an old habit of yours, looking for volumes you'll never be allowed to buy. Translations of French novels a little too daring. Political treatises your father would call improper. But today your hand pauses on something simpler. A small poetry chapbook by Thomas Hood with a cover the color of dried lavender. You don't know why you reach for that one, only that it feels right. When you open it, something slips free. Not a bookmark. A folded slip of paper, uncreased, pressed deliberately between the pages. Your breath catches, but you keep your expression calm. You glance over your shoulder, your mother is still speaking with the shopgirl, and carefully unfold the note. It's written in a slanted, careful hand. The ink is dark blue, not the usual black. No greeting, no name, just 4 lines. She turned not once but twice her head, and with her silence all things said. The air grew still, the trees bent low. What passed between us none shall know. You refold the paper hand, steady heart anything but. You buy the book. Of course you do, and you do not mention it on the walk home. Later that evening you sit alone in your room with the note unfolded on your lap. You recognize the reference it borrows heavily from Leigh Hunt's Jenny Kissed Me, though the tone is more restrained, more measured. You read it again and again, then tuck it behind the lining of your sewing basket, beneath a stack of mending you'll now never throw away. This is how it begins. Historians still debate how common these anonymous exchanges were. Some argue they were rare and risky, discouraged by social constraints and the looming threat of scandal. Others point to entire manuals on epistolary etiquette, how to fold a letter without sealing it, how to leave it in a volume of Tennyson, or beneath a borrowed fan as proof that young people, especially women, found ways to communicate. Quietly, indirectly, but unmistakably. What is certain is this handwriting in 1855 meant more than words. It was character, education, intention. Every curve of a letter spoke volumes. That week your walks become quieter. You're no longer just passing through the park. You're searching for signs, for clues, for the faint possibility of another message. But nothing comes. Days pass. The rain returns, and with it a kind of melancholy. Until Thursday. Mary the maid brings in the post just after tea. A small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with blue twine sits on the tray beside the usual stack of calling cards and circulars. Your mother doesn't recognize the handwriting on the wrapper, but she hands it to you with a curious look. Perhaps it's from Cousin Harriet. You nod, trying not to look as puzzled as you feel. Upstairs, behind the safety of your closed door, you untie the string. Inside is a book. Slim, dark green cloth, no visible title. You open the cover. Pressed inside on the first page is a single violet. Dried, flattened, but still faintly fragrant. Beneath it, in that same careful handwriting, Let silence speak and time reply. If you return, I will be by. Still no name. Still no signature. You close the book and hold it to your chest. It's absurd. It's reckless. And yet, it's not uninvited. The Victorians believed in the language of flowers. Entire guidebooks catalogued what each bloom meant. Lilies for purity, forget-me-nots for remembrance, yew for sorrow. But violets stood for modesty, for hidden affection, for love that blooms in shade. Your chest tightens a little. Later that week, on Sunday morning, you return to the park, not with your mother this time, but with your Aunt Sylvia, who walks more slowly and speaks less. The path near the chestnut trees is quiet. The bench is empty, but tucked into the armrest, just inside the curve of the ironwork, you spot it. A third note, folded tightly. Your fingers close over it before your aunt can even see. It's shorter than the others Tuesday. 11. The reading room. That's it. You know exactly what it means. The public reading room at the South Kensington Institute is open to visitors of all classes. It's well lit, well supervised, and considered a respectable place for young women to expand their knowledge in the company of strangers. It's also the one place where a gentleman and a lady might speak briefly, politely, and under the distant eye of a librarian without raising suspicion. On Tuesday, you choose your clothing with care. A slate blue walking dress, white gloves, the parasol with the darker trim angled as always to the right. You tuck the green book into your reticule and step out with Mary in tow, explaining you have research to do for Sunday's lesson. The reading room is quiet when you arrive. Dust motes drift through beams of morning light, and the scent of old paper clings to the air like lavender in a drawer. You take a seat near the window, open the book to a random page, and pretend to read. You wait, and then he appears. Edward Wexley. Not in a greatcoat this time, but in a well-fitted morning jacket, hair-brushed, clean eyes as steady as ever. He approaches slowly, one hand tucked behind his back. He does not sit. Instead, he stands beside your table, lowers his head slightly, and says softly, "Miss Hartley, I believe you've read something of mine." You look up, not startled, not flushed, just calm. "Yes," you reply. Twice, in fact. A pause. Then, with great care, he slides something across the table. It's a newspaper clipping, an article about a public lecture on Wordsworth and natural philosophy scheduled for next week. He says nothing more, only smiles, then turns and walks away. You fold the clipping and slip it into your book. Your hands don't tremble, but your heart does. Tidbit. In 1855, several reading rooms in London began offering open tables for mixed use, meaning women and men could technically sit near one another, though conversation was not encouraged. It became a discreet haven for intellectual courtship. You walk home in silence. The clipping in your bag feels heavier than it should. Later, as you sip tea in the drawing room, your mother asks whether you found anything useful for your lesson. You nod. "A bit of Wordsworth," you say. "Quite lovely." You sleep that night with the green book under your pillow, and dream of benches, violets, and the quiet weight of unsent letters. The following Sunday arrives with a peculiar stillness, the kind of calm that settles before something important. Not a storm, but something quieter, heavier. You wake before the maid knocks, already halfway dressed in your mind, your thoughts trailing ahead of your hands as they lace your corset and fasten your collar. This is not a day for ribbons or bright colors. You choose your softest blue dress, the one with the cream piping and delicate pearl buttons, and smooth your gloves twice before stepping out of your room. You know who is coming to tea today, and you know what it will mean. Edward Wexley arrives precisely at 4. Punctuality, your mother once said, is the first sign of respect. His boots are polished, his coat conservative but well fitted. He brings a small bouquet of violets and white heather flowers that, according to the guides you've memorized, mean modest affection and protection. You try not to look at them too long, but the message lingers just the same. He bows politely to your mother, shakes hands with your father, and settles into the chair across from you with practiced grace. The conversation begins as expected. Weather, politics, mutual acquaintances. You listen, nodding in the right places, responding when asked, your hands folded neatly on your lap. But beneath the practiced civility, something else hums. His gaze flicks toward yours just briefly. Not bold, not improper, but deliberate, measured. He speaks of a recent lecture on romantic poetry and mentions almost in passing a passage from Wordsworth that mirrors the one he once slipped between the pages of a book. You wonder if your parents catch it, if they recognize the breadcrumb trail he is laying one line at a time, if they suspect the conversation is more layered than it seems. But they continue sipping tea and exchanging pleasantries, unaware that everything is shifting beneath their feet. This is Victorian courtship at its most refined, nothing said outright, but everything meant. Historians note that tea visits like these were the most common form of early courtship among the middle class. The drawing room became a theater of quiet performances, where every gesture mattered: how long a man held his teacup, whether he commented on the floral arrangements, how precisely he aligned his boots when seated. It was less about what was said, and more about what was not an intricate dance of restraint and subtle invitation. You excuse yourself after the first course as custom allows. In the hallway, Mary quietly adjusts the back of your bodice and murmurs something about the roses looking especially fine this week. You understand what she means. She's not talking about the roses. You return to the drawing room with a small plate of tea cakes, placing them gently between the guests before settling once more into your place. Edward thanks you with a nod. The tiniest hint of a smile touches his lips, then vanishes. After half an hour, your father clears his throat and suggests showing Edward his collection of maritime prints in the study. Your mother glances at you but says nothing. This is the signal. In another world, it would be harmless, a man admiring artwork, nothing more. But in this world, it means something entirely different. It means Edward will soon be asking for permission to begin calling formally, the kind of calling that leads eventually to a proposal. After they leave the room, feels larger. Your mother adjusts a cushion and says that Mr. Wexley seems quite proper, high-minded, thoughtful. She doesn't say what she really thinks, but you can hear it between the lines. She is weighing his manners against your prospects, his calm speech against your family's quiet need for stability. And you're still sitting upright, hands folded neatly, but inside something has softened. Something feels real. You rise before she can ask anything else and retreat upstairs to your room, closing the door gently behind you. In the mirror, your reflection looks just as it did that morning. Same pale face, same tidy braids. But your posture is different. Not stiffer, not slouched, just more certain, as if you've stepped into yourself. You sit at your desk and pull out your notebook, the one where you used to scribble fragments of poems and phrases you liked. You add something new, not a quote this time, but your own words. You write slowly, carefully, as if he might one day read them. You don't sign your name. Later, as the lamplight turns amber and the house settles into evening, your father taps on your door. He doesn't enter, just murmurs that Edward has expressed interest in calling again, and that he sees no reason to object. You answer with a quiet yes, though he's already walked away. You sit on your bed in silence for several minutes. After that, your hands still resting in your lap, the faint smell of violets lingering in the folds of your skirt. Tidbit. A well-documented but little-known detail of Victorian etiquette was that if a young man visited a household 3 times and was served the same flavor of cake or jam at each visit, it was understood as subtle encouragement to continue pursuing courtship. Variation meant uncertainty. Repetition meant welcome. You don't sleep easily that night, not from anxiety but from anticipation. You lie awake beneath the quilt your grandmother embroidered years ago, listening to the faint creak of the house and the occasional horse cart on the street below. You think of Edward's quiet voice, his careful choice of words, the glint of recognition in his eyes when your fingertips brush the tea plate. You think of how no one else seemed to notice, and how powerful that made it feel. In this world of silent signals and watchful glances, you are beginning to find a language that doesn't require permission. You are beginning to feel seen, and it feels impossibly like the start of something true. The following Thursday brings an invitation your mother finds especially pleasing, an evening charity ball held at the Bloomsbury Assembly Rooms, hosted by the Ladies' Aid Society. It's exactly the sort of affair a proper young woman ought to attend. There will be chaperones, musicians, and well-placed social opportunities. And though your mother doesn't say it aloud, she's already thinking of gloves and fans and seating arrangements by the time she folds the invitation and tucks it into her sewing basket. You pretend to be moderately enthusiastic, but inside your thoughts whirl, because you know without needing confirmation that Edward will be there. These events exist for people like him, presentable, promising, unattached. And more than that, they exist for people like you expected to navigate a room full of flickering gaslight and gauzy smiles with the elegance of a silk scarf drifting on the breeze. The morning of the ball, Mary lays out your blue taffeta gown, the one with the white silk underskirt and the bodice that still fits just. You polish your pearl drop earrings yourself. Fingers steady, heart not so much. And then there's the matter of the fan. You don't choose the newer ivory one. Instead, you take the older satin fan, the one with the faded painted birds and the faint crack along one panel. Not because it's prettier, but because you've practiced with it. You know exactly how to hold it when you wish to seem amused, how to snap it shut to signal boredom, how to let it hang open loosely when your attention is perhaps somewhere else entirely. The fan is your instrument tonight. It will speak louder than your voice. When you arrive, the hall is already humming with warmth and chatter. Chandeliers flicker above, throwing soft glints off hair combs and cufflinks. Music swells from the corner, where a small ensemble plays a gentle reel. You take your mother's arm, make the rounds curtsy where appropriate, but your eyes keep sweeping the room, searching. You find him standing near the refreshments table, speaking with an older couple. He sees you at nearly the same moment. There's no greeting, no bow, just a glance held a second too long and a tilt of his head. Then he returns to his conversation. You move on, heart thudding in time with the music. Half an hour later, during the quadrille, your mother guides you toward the dance card table. A young man approaches, introduces himself, asks for the second dance. You nod, let him write his name. Then another. But not Edward. He remains across the room, always near someone else, never quite alone. Until the fifth dance. You're standing near the edge of the floor fan open, watching the couples twirl when you feel his presence beside you. Not close, not improper, but unmistakable. He waits a moment too, perhaps, and then asks with quiet civility whether you might spare him the next waltz. You incline your head, not trusting your voice. And when the music begins, he steps forward, offering his arm with such measured restraint that the gesture seems almost sacred. You take it gloved hand to gloved hand and allow yourself to be led onto the floor. The waltz is slow, elegant, chaperone approved in both tempo and spacing, but still your hearts beat faster than they ought to. You don't speak, not really. Just a word or two about the weather, about the flowers decorating the room. But your eyes do the work, and so does the fan. You let it flutter gently in your left hand, half open, as the music turns. Then during the pause before the final phrase, you draw it closer to your cheek and glance sideways, not directly at him, but just past his shoulder. The signal is subtle but clear. You are not indifferent. In Victorian society, fans became coded tools of courtship, especially among young women who had few other ways to express interest. There were entire booklets, often sold in secret, that explained how to use a fan to communicate everything from disapproval to affection. Some women memorized the codes, others invented their own. But nearly all knew the basics. A slowly closed fan meant, "I wish to speak with you." An open fan covering the chest meant, "You have my attention." And one fluttered gently to the side that meant, "Perhaps." Historians still disagree on how widespread these fan languages really were. Some call them myth. Others insist they were as crucial as gloves and dowries. What is certain, however, is that for women like you, raised in a world of control and observation, even the illusion of secret communication felt like liberation. When the dance ends, Edward thanks you politely. He says nothing more, nor do you. But as he steps away, your gloved fingers brush accidentally, of course. And in that brief contact, you feel more than you felt in weeks. The evening winds down slowly. You dance 2 more times, speak with a cousin you barely remember, eat a small, lukewarm tart. But nothing else quite matches that moment on the dance floor. That pause between measures where the music seemed to hold its breath, just for the 2 of you. At home, you undress in silence. Mary chatters about someone else's gown being too short, about one girl's heel breaking near the punch table. You nod, murmur agreement, but your mind is elsewhere. When the house goes quiet, you take out your notebook and draw not words this time, but shapes. The folds of your fan, the curve of a shoulder, the notes of a waltz. Somewhere out there he is remembering it too. And if not, then you've still had something rare. A shared rhythm in a crowded room. A signal sent, received, and understood. Sometimes that's enough. Your mother declares the air too dry for your complexion, which is why she suggests the Sunday afternoon promenade. In truth, she simply wants to be seen. Sundays are for appearances, and the gravel path of Regent's Park, polished, respectable, safely curated, is the perfect place for modest display. Parasols bloom like pastel flowers. Walking sticks tap lightly along flagstone borders. Bonnets are arranged with military precision. And you, trailing a polite half-step behind your mother, try not to glance too obviously in the direction of the wrought iron gate. But of course he's there. Edward in his slightly scuffed boots and overly starched collar, walking beside his cousin and another well-dressed gentleman. You spot him first long before your mother does. And for a moment, just a moment, you wonder if it's wrong to feel as though someone placed him there just for you. As if this entire city, its soot and splendor, its sermons and scones exists only to choreograph your steps in relation to his. He catches sight of you as they round the curve. He doesn't smile. That wouldn't be appropriate. But he does lower his gaze a fraction, then lift it again slower this time, as if reading something in the way your shawl rests across your shoulder. You respond not with a word, but with a faint tilt of your chin. Barely there, yet enough. And so begins the promenade. Your mother notices them, of course she does, but says nothing. The Wexleys are a respectable family. No gossip, no known scandal. A younger son, yes, but at least he's not in trade. And that other fellow, he's a solicitor, isn't he? From Lincoln's Inn. She pretends not to be looking, but every time they pass, her gloved hand tightens around her parasol. The next hour becomes a slow, socially acceptable orbit. You walk past them. They walk past you. At one point, Edward's cousin says something that makes him laugh too loudly, and the sound draws your eyes unbidden. He sees you looking, then grows suddenly serious, adjusting his cravat with a boyish awkwardness that should make you wince. But instead, you smile behind your fan. You wonder what it would be like to speak freely, to ask him about his favorite book or whether he prefers cats to dogs, whether he remembers that night at the charity ball the same way you do. But such questions remain locked behind etiquette and layered petticoats. You are a respectable young woman after all. And respectable young women do not indulge in idle speculation, at least not out loud. Victorian society prized self-restraint almost as much as it did tea and inherited silver. Emotional excess was considered dangerous, especially in young women. Doctors warned against nervous fits and wandering wombs, diagnosing any deviation from stoic politeness as a possible sign of illness. Even too much laughter could raise eyebrows. Imagine what true unrehearsed affection might cause. So instead of words, you exchange glances. When you pause by the duck pond, he lingers near the iron fence. When you drop your handkerchief accidentally but not unintentionally, his cousin picks it up and returns it, offering a short bow. Edward doesn't speak. He just watches as you thank the cousin, your eyes never quite meeting his. It's a strange dance, this thing you're doing, measured and distant, and yet oddly thrilling. As the afternoon wanes, your mother decides they've walked enough. You loop your arm through hers and head toward the gates, your boots clicking softly on the gravel. Edward has moved toward the exit as well, just far enough ahead to avoid suspicion, just close enough for one final glance. And in that moment, quiet, fleeting, perfect, your gazes lock. No smile, no nod, just the recognition of what has passed between you, the mutual acknowledgement that something is unfolding here without touch, without promise, but deeply real all the same. Later that evening, when the lamps are lit and the roast is cooling on the sideboard, you sit in the drawing room with your embroidery. Your fingers move mechanically over the linen, but your mind drifts. You think of the way his boots creaked when he shifted his weight, the faint furrow in his brow when the wind caught your veil, and most vividly his silence. Not emptiness, but a kind of quiet filled with meaning. Some would call this nonsense. They'd say love requires speech declarations, passionate confession. But in your world, silence is its own language. And the space between two people, carefully maintained, fiercely protected, is where love often finds its root. The next Sunday you return to the park. This time, Edward doesn't bring a cousin. He walks alone a respectable distance ahead, hands clasped behind his back. He doesn't approach, doesn't even look your way. But as you pass, your shawl brushing slightly in the breeze, you feel it, that slight shift in the air. The acknowledgement, the quiet companionship of two souls who understand the value of restraint. And it is enough, for now. You begin to notice him elsewhere at St. Paul's during evensong, near the booksellers on Great Russell Street, once even near the greengrocer's, studying a crate of apples with a seriousness that makes you laugh, always from afar, always observing, never interrupting, but somehow, always there. One Thursday morning, while passing through the Burlington Arcade with your mother, you pause near a window display of lace gloves, and there, tucked behind the glass, is a small folded paper, not addressed, not signed, but unmistakably his. You do not open it at once. That would be unseemly. Instead, you wait until evening, until your mother has retired and the lamps are dimmed. Then, by the firelight, you unfold it. The handwriting is careful, measured, just 3 lines. You read them twice, then fold the paper, and hide it between the pages of your diary. Later you'll discover that Victorian society was riddled with such secret messages, hidden notes, folded fans, embroidery codes, even floral arrangements that conveyed specific sentiments. The language of flowers alone could communicate everything from disdain to devotion. A sprig of rosemary remembrance, a yellow carnation, you disappoint me, and purple lilac's first emotions of love. Historians still debate how widespread these secret codes truly were. Some argue they were more myth than reality, popularized by romance novels and etiquette manuals rather than actual practice. But for those who lived within the stiff confines of Victorian decorum, even the illusion of coded communication provided comfort and occasionally courage. You think of this as you place the note inside your diary. not because it contains a confession or even a compliment, but because it confirms something more subtle, that he too is paying attention, that he too understands the rules and is willing to bend them just slightly in your direction. That Sunday, the promenade feels different. You walk the path as before your mother, chatting idly about the Reverend's daughter's unfortunate bonnet. But your mind is elsewhere. When you see him standing alone near the rose arbor, you nod once, just enough. He inclines his head in return. The dance continues. There is a rhythm now, a quiet, shared understanding. You don't speak, you don't write, but somehow the distance between you begins to feel less like a wall and more like a bridge. And when the time comes when you know he will ask your father for permission to court, you are ready. Ready not because you have touched him, not because you know the sound of his laughter or the warmth of his palm, but because through glances and pauses and shared breezes on a gravel path, you have come to understand something rare. Affection, when carefully nurtured, can bloom even in silence. It's a Tuesday morning when the first bouquet appears. You're sitting at the pianoforte, playing through a set of etudes you don't particularly like, when the housemaid gently clears her throat. She's holding a small bundle, wrapped in plain brown paper. No ribbon, no note. Just a parcel bound with simple twine slightly damp at the corners from the stems within. Your mother engrossed in the post, and half a slice of marmalade toast, waves it away with a shrug. "Oh, another delivery for your aunt," perhaps she murmurs, as if floral tributes were as routine as the milkman. But you know better. You take the parcel gently, your fingers brushing against the papery edges. The flowers are fresh, delicately arranged, and unmistakably deliberate purple asters. Queen Anne's lace and a single pale cyclamen at the center. The arrangement is modest, unlike the garish hothouse roses, fashionable among the newly rich, and every stem trimmed with care. No card, no initials. But it doesn't matter. You carry them to your room and arrange them in your favorite porcelain vase, the one with the tiny chip at the base that no one else seems to notice. Then, after some deliberation, you place the vase on the windowsill, not centered, not hidden, just enough to be seen from the street below should someone happen to look up from the opposite corner. And someone does. That evening you return from your embroidery group to find that the bouquet has shifted just slightly in the breeze. A leaf has fallen on the windowsill. You smile at the thought that perhaps it caught someone's eye as it drifted downward. In Victorian flower language, purple asters carried the meaning of delicate love and daintiness. Queen Anne's lace whispered sanctuary, and cyclamen, rarely used outside of poetry circles, symbolized resignation or parting depending on how it was placed. But in this case, nestled gently at the center, it suggested something far less melancholy, a quiet surrender, a trust offered without demand. You recall reading that even the most prestigious finishing schools included sessions on interpreting floral arrangements. Girls were expected to understand not just Latin conjugations and French pleasantries, but the entire coded system of botanic courtship. This was a world where a bouquet could deliver more than a handwritten note, where nature itself became a language for love. Historians continue to debate just how seriously these codes were taken. Some argue they were little more than sentimental amusements, but others, especially women, writing in private journals or letters, left clear evidence that such bouquets were carefully crafted, received with trembling hands and interpreted with almost sacred attention. You receive 3 more bouquets that week. Each one arrives without fanfare. Each one contains a variation blue forget-me-nots, tucked into the third, a few stalks of white heather in the second. And each time you place them on your windowsill just a bit more boldly. The message is returned not with ink, but with arrangement colors grouped to suggest reply, a missing bloom to convey restraint. At no point is this ever spoken aloud. Even your sister, who notices everything, says only, "You've developed quite the talent for arranging field flowers." You nod. You do not explain, but the most daring gesture comes not from flowers, but from words. On Thursday afternoon, you find a small slip of paper tucked inside the newest bouquet. This one is almost hidden, folded in half, and slipped among the stems of a snowdrop. You unfold it carefully, aware that paper smudges easily when it's damp. It's a short excerpt from Wordsworth. She dwelt among the untrodden ways beside the springs of Dover Maid, whom there were none to praise and very few to love. You recognize the verse immediately. You'd read it in your poetry circle just last month. But this version has one small difference. The last line is underlined, and beneath it, in neat handwriting, is a single word. Not a name, just "Accept me." You read it again, then again. This time you do not tuck it away. Instead, you press it between the pages of your dictionary, letting the weight of language guard a feeling you cannot speak. Later that evening, while your mother dozes over her knitting and your father reads the Gazette, you take the bouquet from your windowsill and place it on the hall table instead, where anyone entering the house might see it. It's a risk, but one you take willingly. Your days begin to revolve around these exchanges. You notice the difference between wildflowers and cultivated varieties. You begin carrying your own small gardening guide when you walk through the park, not to identify specimens, but to prepare for what messages might come next. One morning, a particularly lavish arrangement includes not only blooms, but a tiny pressed leaf, lavender brittle and fragrant, suggesting devotion. You leave the windowsill empty that night, and the next morning a note appears. Just one sentence. "I'll not presume again." And he doesn't. The next bouquet is simple, almost sparse, a return to subtlety. You feel strangely grateful. One evening, while attending a charity recital at your aunt's parlor, you spot him across the room. He's not looking at you, but at the portrait above the fireplace, or perhaps at the bookcase. But his expression softens as he turns his head, and you realize he's seen you after all. He doesn't cross the room, doesn't smile, but as the quartet begins a new piece, something soft, lilting, unfamiliar, he shifts his weight from one foot to the other just slightly. A movement so small you're certain no one else notices, and in response you adjust your glove. You've heard of such things, silent dances played out in drawing rooms. Girls who responded to coded notes with a handkerchief, stitched in a particular corner, a fan opened just halfway, a glance held for half a breath longer than required. It's said that the most skilled ladies could conduct entire conversations without uttering a syllable. The art of flirtation, some called it. But for you, it feels like something else entirely. Not a game, not a tactic, but a way of being seen. Somewhere in the stillness between letter and bloom, between gaze and gesture, you feel yourself becoming known. Your sister teases you once lightly without cruelty. "You've taken to mooning at the window like a lady in a Gothic novel," she says, laughing. But you only smile and reply, "Moonlight's better than gossip." She raises an eyebrow. "So there is something to gossip about," you do not answer. And yet the following morning she places a ribbon beside your breakfast plate. Soft lavender silk, the same shade as the cyclamen from the first bouquet. No words pass between you. None are needed. Weeks pass. The flowers continue. Sometimes they come with verse, sometimes alone, but always with care, always with thought. Until one morning when the maid arrives empty-handed. "No delivery today, miss." You nod as if it doesn't matter, but your hand lingers at the window for longer than usual. That evening you place a single violet from your garden on the sill. Just one. Small, easily missed, but deliberate. And the next day the bouquet returns. No verse, no leaf, just blossoms. You've passed another test, one you didn't know was being given. And now for the first time you begin to wonder what comes next. You know what society expects. If he intends to court you, he must ask your father's permission. There will be tea, visits, perhaps a formal announcement. But you also know something else, something deeper. that you have built this entire connection, not on conversation or confession, but on trust. Trust that he sees you. Trust that you see him. And trust that when the time comes, you will know exactly how to answer. The house feels heavier today, as though even the lace curtains are holding their breath. You've known for several days that something was shifting, though nothing visible had changed. No missing bouquets, no strange silences, no faltering glances. But the rhythm has altered. You feel it most keenly in the way your mother has taken to smoothing your hair each morning, as if inspecting you for some invisible transformation. The maid brings in biscuits with more ceremony than usual, and your father clears his throat twice before reading the headlines aloud at breakfast. And then the letter arrives. Not for you, for your father, sealed in crisp cream paper, bearing the Wexley crest, a griffin's head, and a thistle surrounded by tiny fleur-de-lis. The envelope is modest, but its contents reverberate silently through the parlor. Your father doesn't call you in. He simply folds the paper neatly after reading it, and says to your mother in a voice just above a whisper, "We shall expect him on Thursday after the third sitting." By Thursday you've rehearsed nothing, and imagined everything. The afternoon sunlight makes the drawing room feel too warm, and you've repinned your collar 3 times. Your hands refuse to remain still, fidgeting with your stitching, until your mother gently removes the needle from your lap and replaces it with your teacup. Edward Wexley enters precisely at 4 o'clock. Not early, not late. He's dressed plainly but respectfully. No ostentation, no unnecessary flourish. You recognize the way he folds his gloves into his coat pocket, the familiar stiffness of his shoulders, and the way his eyes move briefly, only briefly, in your direction before he bows. They speak in the library, your father and Edward, with the door shut. You're left in the drawing room with your mother and sister, who are uncharacteristically silent. The only sounds are the occasional tick of the long case clock and the stirring of the silver spoon in your cup. It's only 15 minutes, maybe 20, but it feels like hours. When the door finally opens and Edward steps out, he doesn't walk toward you. Not right away. He waits for your father to nod first, and then only then does he approach. He doesn't sit. He stands just slightly too far away, hat still in hand, and in a tone so gentle it barely carries over the creaking of the floorboards. He says the words you've half-dreamed, half-dreaded for weeks. "I would be honored to request permission to call again, Miss Hartley, if it would not displease you." No flourish, no verse, no flowers, just the offer laid bare between you. You meet his eyes, and for the first time you do not look away. "I believe I would like that," you say. And that is all. It is a strange dance, this next phase. Not yet engagement, not quite simple acquaintance. You are now being courted, and everyone knows it, even the butcher's apprentice who nods a bit too knowingly when you pass by. Your walks become routine, always accompanied, always proper. And yet something is different. His steps match yours now, even when your chaperone lags behind. He lets you choose the direction through Hyde Park, lets you linger at the marble fountains even when it rains. Your conversations remain measured, books, charity events, family, but the pauses are warmer now. The silences feel less like walls and more like blankets. He listens when you speak of your cousin in Devonshire, laughs softly when you describe your neighbor's pet goose. He never interrupts, never presses. And he always waits for you to end each walk with the final word. One afternoon, as you part ways at the garden gate, he tips his hat and says, "Until tomorrow." You surprise even yourself when you answer, "I look forward to it." It is the most daring thing you've said aloud. You suspect that your mother notices. She begins to set aside the nicer biscuits for tea on Wednesdays and Fridays. Your sister begins humming songs from the quadrille when you walk past. But neither of them says a word. Edward continues to visit regularly. He brings no more flowers. Instead, he speaks of his plans. Nothing grandiose, just thoughts about helping expand his father's printing shop and starting a subscription reading room for young boys in Lambeth. He doesn't brag. He simply wonders aloud. And in doing so, he invites you to see his future as something with space for yours in it. One morning, your father requests a word. He clears his throat, adjusts his cuffs, and stares out the window longer than necessary before saying, "I believe Mr. Wexley is earnest, thoughtful, not hasty. That is, respectable." You nod unsure if this is approval or simply observation. It is both. The courtship progresses quietly. No announcements, no promenades designed for spectacle. But you feel its presence in everything, the way your gloves are now always mended before Sunday, the way your dresses are subtly let out or taken in depending on your mother's mood, the way Edward's name is spoken more freely in the house. One Thursday he arrives with something unusual, a small book of poetry. Not new, well-worn with frayed edges and soft margins. He holds it out to you without explanation. Inside the front cover in tiny faint script is a quote from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. "I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise." He says nothing more about it. But that night, when you place the book beneath your pillow, your dreams are filled with meadows and ink, and the faint scent of asters. Victorian courtship customs demanded restraint, but they also required intention. A man who visited without purpose could quickly find himself whispered about unfavorably. A woman who appeared too eager might find herself left behind at the next assembly. The delicate balance between modesty and clarity was a social high-wire act, and it was often women through hand fans, gloves, and the choice of seating at a piano bench who bore the greater weight of performing it. One fascinating tidbit from the time upper-class young ladies were often taught the subtle codes of glove etiquette. For example, removing only the right glove during a dance was a subtle sign of interest. Removing both was considered too forward. There were entire booklets, unofficial of course, that listed such meanings in comical precision. Historians still argue whether these codes were truly followed with consistency or were more a romanticized notion in hindsight. But what is clear is that the theater of Victorian romance often relied more on subtext than speech. Your courtship continues through winter. There is no dramatic proposal at a family ball, no sudden declarations, just slow, steady presence, letters signed only with initials, shared walks that begin to feel like habits, mutual silences that no longer ache. And then one evening in early spring, Edward requests a private conversation with your father. This time the door remains closed longer. When it opens, your father's expression is unreadable. He says only, "I believe you should take a turn about the garden, Lillian. Someone will join you shortly." You step outside, heart pounding louder than your footsteps on the gravel path. Edward arrives a moment later. He walks beside you in silence, the air between you fragile and full. And then, in that same steady tone he's always used, he asks, "If it would not displease you, Miss Hartley, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" You do not speak right away. Instead, you let the moment stretch. Let him see your breath steady. Let him feel the pause before the world changes. And then softly you say, "Yes, I would be honored." That night, alone in your room, you lift the small poetry book from your dresser and press your fingers gently over the inscription. You think of every bouquet, every glance, every step taken at a distance, every word unsaid, and you realize with a strange, thrilling certainty that love had been speaking all along, just not in the language most people expected. The day arrives shrouded in the thinnest mist, neither gloomy nor bright, but softened at the edges, as if the entire city is holding its breath just for you. The bells of St. Dunstan's ring faintly in the distance, not for ceremony, but as part of the rhythm of London herself. You wake before anyone calls, before the maid brings tea, before the bustle begins. For a moment you sit upright in bed, not quite ready to stand, fingers twisted in the whitework embroidery of your linen sheet. Your room smells faintly of lavender and starch. The wedding dress hangs patiently on the armoire door. Ivory, not pure white, true to tradition, and your mother's insistence that ostentation is no replacement for grace. You touch the hem with reverent fingers, surprised to find no trembling there. There are gloves, yes, and a veil with tiny hand-sewn beads. But your hands linger on a different object, the poetry book from Edward, now gently worn at the corners from rereading. There will be no sweeping declarations this morning. That has never been your way. Instead, everything unfolds with calm precision. The hairdresser arrives with pins and ribbons. Your mother supervises quietly, only stepping forward to adjust the brooch at your collar. Your sister stands behind you, her hands fidgeting with her own bonnet eyes, suspiciously bright. The carriage ride to the church is quiet, filled only with the creak of wheels and the occasional clatter of hoofbeats. You stare out the window, not at the crowds gathering, but at the lace of morning fog draped across the rooftops. London, you think, has never looked so still. Inside the church, the scent of beeswax and lilies mixes with dust and damp stone. There is music low and steady, but your ears barely register it. What you notice most is Edward already at the front, his hands clasped so tightly they've gone pale. You walk slowly, counting your breaths rather than the steps. Each footfall is deliberate, each second suspended. He turns only as you reach the final pew, and then finally your eyes meet. There are no whispered vows exchanged in secret. Everything is said aloud for all to hear, but the real words are in the spaces in between the slight tilt of Edward's head when you say his name, the nearly imperceptible curl of his fingers, when he slides the ring onto yours. You feel the warmth of his hand even before it touches yours. And then it happens. Your fingers graze his. It's nothing really. A whisper of skin. A single brief contact. But it's enough. The air shifts. The room tilts just slightly. You feel something release inside your chest, like a held note finally exhaled. You take his hand fully now. Cool, then warm. Still trembling. You don't look down. You don't need to. Because everything, every wordless moment, every glance, every flower, every verse has led to this single silent promise. No kiss follows. That is not your tradition. Not here. Not now. But the vows are sealed all the same. The walk back down the aisle is slower than you expected. Everyone watches, but you hardly see them. Edward whispers nothing. He only walks beside you hand in hand for the first time. At the carriage, your father helps you in with a grace that feels more like goodbye than assistance. Your mother watches from the steps, her expression unreadable but full. Your sister waves, biting her lip to keep from beaming. The door closes. The wheels turn. And just like that, you are someone's wife. You and Edward sit side by side. Still no words, but your fingers are still touching. You wonder how many times they might have brushed before this by accident, by wind, by shared railing, but this is the first one that counts. You do not rush into conversation. Instead, you both watch the city roll past. London looks different from this angle, as if it too is adjusting to your new status. The lamplighters are just beginning their rounds despite the daylight. A boy on a corner sells violets from a basket. Edward notices your glance, and without speaking, taps lightly on the window. The carriage slows. A coin is passed through a crack in the pane. A handful of violets is returned. He places them in your lap, just barely brushing your glove. The silence holds them more securely than any words ever could. And as the carriage turns towards your new home, you realize something rather astonishing. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. You do not know how many letters you will write him when he's away, or what small arguments will unfold over how tea should be brewed. You do not know yet how it feels to fall asleep with someone breathing beside you, or how his voice sounds when frightened. But you know this restraint has not robbed you of romance. It has shaped it, honed it, given it a depth that runs beneath the surface, invisible to those who search only for spectacle. And so ends the chapter of love without touching, at least in its most formal sense. But it is far from a singular tale, because long before the rules of Victorian London, and long after them, there were hearts learning to speak through absence, through music, through distance, through time. In other corners of the world, other stories were unfolding. Stories where touch was forbidden, or impractical, or simply unnecessary. Where love echoed across walls or within pages, or in the space between two breaths. Let's go there now, to Vietnam, where a flute once replaced a voice. You arrive not with luggage, but with memory. The fog of London gives way now to the softer haze of dusk in Jai Viet, a land of crimson roofs and swaying bamboo, where the wind carries more than scent. It carries song. It is the late 13th century during the reign of the Trần Dynasty, a time of both poetry and defense, where scholars wield brushes as fiercely as generals wield swords. And in a garden walled with jasmine vines and mossy stone, another kind of quiet love begins to stir. You are not Lillian anymore. You are Lin, daughter of a minor court official in Thăng Long, the imperial capital. Your world is one of long sleeves and low bows of lacquered gates, and lanterns casting fish-scale shadows across tiled courtyards. Every evening after the household's final meal, and the servants are sent to their mats, you retreat to the pavilion by the west wall. It is shaded by hibiscus trees, carved with symbols of immortality and fortune. No one asks why you go there. They assume it is for study, for poetry, for feminine peace. But it is none of those things. Or rather, it is all of them and something more. Because from beyond the wall, somewhere just past the jasmine hedge, comes music. A bamboo flute, faint, airy, and unmistakably meant for you. At first it had startled you. Weeks ago, when you first noticed the sound drifting in during your embroidery hour, you thought it a traveler's whim or a bored palace guard's evening habit. But the melody returned. Then again, and it changed. It began to echo your movements. When you paused, it paused. When you leaned forward to turn a page, it fluttered higher, as though responding to your breath. You told no one. There is no conversation. No messages passed through hidden doors. No names spoken aloud. You don't even know who he is. You've never seen his face. But each evening the flute returns and you begin to answer. Not with words, of course. That would be too easy, too exposed. Instead, you begin to alter your routine. You light a lantern when you are pleased. You leave your red fan open when melancholy grips you. One night you drop a blossom of sewer flower deliberately in the garden's far corner. The next evening the flute plays a melody so bright and giddy that you laugh out loud into your sleeve. This becomes your courtship. You in your courtyard with your calligraphy scrolls and ceramic teacup. He wherever he is with his flute and unspoken purpose. There is a rhythm to it. You begin to listen not just to the notes but to the silences between them. One night the music does not come. Your hands shake over your inkstone. The next evening it returns, and with it a slower melody, almost apologetic. There is a tenderness in that pause. It tells you more than any poem could. This is not a time of love marriages. Daughters are matched by horoscope dowry and rank. You are aware of your station. You are not foolish, but you are also aware of what this has become. It is not a rebellion. It is not a scandal. It is a kind of prayer, a shared habit, a daily ritual passed between two invisible hands. One morning your mother announces that a match has been proposed. A merchant's son, wealthy, proper, and thoroughly vetted. Your father nods solemnly. A date will be selected after the Mid-Autumn Festival. You say nothing. But that night you do not go to the garden. You sit in your chamber facing the wall, fists clenched, and still softly, persistently, the flute begins to play. A different melody this time. A farewell, perhaps. Or maybe a thank you. It winds upward like a heron in flight, then falls slowly into silence. You listen until your eyes fill, and then you bow, not to the wall, not to the musician, to the feeling itself, to what it gave you in the absence of touch. Evenings continue, but the pavilion feels quieter. You marry the merchant's son in a ceremony of gold thread and rice wine. He is kind. Your life becomes full of small duties and modest joys. And yet on certain nights when the air is warm and still, you find yourself humming. A tune you never quite learned from a flute you never quite saw. Your heart does not ache. It rests. Because love you learned can live and end without beginning at all. And in Jai Viet during the Trần Dynasty, such stories were not rare. Music was often used to court across walls, across rank, across fate. In fact, among elite families, it was considered more honorable to admire someone from afar through art than to pursue them openly. Flutes and monochord zithers, Jan Bao, were seen as vessels for longing. Gentle, respectful, but precise. There's even an old proverb recorded in early Vietnamese literature. To play the flute beyond the wall is to breathe with someone without sharing a room. Not all of these romances ended in union, but that was never the point. They were not about results. They were about echo, about the act of being seen, or in this case, heard by someone who chose to notice you carefully. And now we cross continents once more, to a land of saffron domes and rose gardens, where love was not played but penned, on paper scented with rose oil, folded small enough to hide between pages. You arrive now in Isfahan, the capital of Safavid Persia, in the 17th century. The air is thick with rosewater, and the sound of water lapping in turquoise-tiled fountains. Arches soar above the city's grand bazaar, while the streets glow with afternoon light filtered through carved wooden screens. But hidden among the open courtyards and painted mosques is a quieter story yours. You are called Parisa daughter of a respected manuscript illuminator. Each day you help your mother press flower petals between parchment or trace gold leaf along the margins of Quranic texts. You do not speak often in public, as is expected of women in your class, but your mind is loud, your inner world flooded with images and questions you would not dare ask aloud. It begins with a book, not a gift, but a purchase. One afternoon you visit your father's favorite bookseller, a narrow, dusty stall lined with volumes bound in indigo cloth and stamped with the calligrapher's mark. You pull out a copy of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, and as you flip through the pages, a small slip of paper falls out. It is folded, precisely creased, so many times it nearly disappears in your palm, and written in impossibly fine Nastaliq script. It simply reads, "If I were a bird, I would nest where your thoughts sleep." That's all. No name, no flourish, no signature. You press the slip back between the pages and purchase the book without a word. Days pass, then weeks, and then another book. This time it is poetry by Saadi borrowed from your cousin. Another slip, another phrase. There are gardens where feet never tread, but hearts do. You begin to look forward to these moments, not because you know who writes them, but because of what they offer recognition without intrusion. A mirror held quietly to your thoughts. You never speak of it. There is no one you could trust to understand. One day you discover something new. The ink, always the same shade of brown, has begun to carry a scent. Rose faint but unmistakable. You wonder if it is intentional, or if the writer merely holds their pen too close to a perfumed wrist. You never answer the notes. That would be improper. But you do begin to linger at the bookshop. You pick books at random and flip their pages more slowly than needed. Once you leave behind a sprig of saffron tucked inside a blank folio. No reply acknowledges it. But the next poem reads, "What is fragrance if not memory reaching forward?" This silent exchange continues for months. The lines become bolder, never indecent, never presumptuous but unafraid. A note references a private line of a poem you once annotated in the margin of your own diary. That detail makes your breath catch. Whoever writes these has seen your writing, perhaps held a volume you once returned, perhaps asked after your name in hushed tones. You begin to wonder if you've met him. A quiet young student in the madrasa courtyard, a traveling apprentice, the bookseller's nephew. You look harder at faces, listen closer to footsteps, but none match the gentleness of the poems. You stop trying to guess. The mystery becomes its own language. And in a world where your voice is measured, this becomes your song. One morning your father announces that you will marry soon. The groom's family is noble, their house filled with mathematicians and diplomats. You are told they admired your embroidery skills. Your dowry will include illuminated pages and hand-stitched pillow covers. You nod politely and begin preparing. The poems stop. At first you feel relief, then hollowness, a strange kind of grief. It is not love you mourn, but the closing of a door you never opened. You tuck the notes into the lining of your writing chest. On your wedding day you find one last note in the pages of a forgotten book. Some gardens bloom only once, so that the memory of their color might last a lifetime. You read it again that night beneath a veil of embroidered silk. The history of Persian courtship is filled with such delicate episodes. The Safavid period, especially in Isfahan, saw a flourishing of poetry, calligraphy, and private devotion. It was not uncommon for anonymous verses to circulate among elite women, often placed inside books' handkerchiefs, or between the folds of a scarf. These messages, although subtle, were a recognized form of emotional courtship. And because literacy among women in noble circles was encouraged, these romantic exchanges often took place in the margins of literature itself, hidden in plain sight. Historians still debate whether such romances were ever consummated, or if they served instead as emotional exercises, safe, symbolic, and unspoken. But for the women who carried them in silence, they were more than fantasy. They were a form of freedom, a space to imagine love on their own terms, to be chosen not for their dowry or lineage, but for the way they read a metaphor. Your life as Perisa unfolds gently. You become a wife, then a mother. You keep your writing chest locked. Years later, your daughter finds one of the notes and asks about it. You smile but say nothing, because some poems are written not to be read aloud, but to be remembered in the quiet places of the heart. And now we move again, this time north, to colder lands, where devotion wears a woolen coat and sings in the voice of liturgy, where the final verse of a hymn can carry more longing than 1,000 letters. You step now into the stillness of rural Tsarist Russia, near the year 1887, where the sky often seems too wide and the earth too quiet. A village of worn wood and whispering birches rises at the edge of the forest, dusted in snow for most of the year. The church is the heart of the village, its blue onion dome glowing faintly in the pale light, its bell calling not just to worship, but to memory, to habit, to something deeper than routine. You are called Daria, the daughter of the village priest, and your life is shaped by prayer, embroidery, and silence. Inside the house you share with your family. You are expected to follow the rhythms of the liturgical calendar, Easter breads, candle wax, woolen vestments stitched with gold thread. You sing in the women's half of the choir, your voice rising with the others during vespers and matins. But there is one voice you hear more closely than all the rest, a boy in the men's choir, Mikhail. He is 17 a year older than you, with a shy smile and a voice that climbs like smoke during the final hymn. You have never spoken, not once, not even to say hello in the lane or offer him a plum from your apron. And yet he sees you. You know he does, because each time he sings the closing verse, his eyes settle just above your shoulder. Not directly, never improperly, but enough to make the space between your ribs tighten. His voice always lingers just a beat longer on the final note, and it is only then that your breath catches, and you feel something pass between you, without ever having been exchanged. It's as if the music were not written for God, but for the secret space between two hearts across a chapel aisle. You do not tell anyone, not your mother, who has already hinted at a suitable match with the miller's son, nor your older sister, who would laugh and call you foolish. But each Sunday you begin to anticipate that final hymn as if it were a message in a bottle. The way Mikhail phrases the rising intervals, the way he holds the final note just a fraction longer than the others. It is subtle, but it is unmistakable. Not everyone could notice, but you do. This is not unusual in your world. In 18th century Russia, the Orthodox Church forbids most secular contact between unmarried boys and girls. But within the holy space of music, things bloom quietly. Sacred music is allowed, encouraged even, but it is not immune to human longing. Many composers, even the most devout, are known to have buried layers of personal meaning into the notes. A rising line here might echo a name. A harmonic inversion might mimic the syllables of a whispered phrase. These are metaphors dressed in prayer robes, and if done carefully, no one need ever know. You are not musically trained yourself, but you are observant. The cadence at the end of that one hymn, the one only Mikhail seems to volunteer to lead, has changed. It modulates now into a key that warms your chest, like stepping inside from the frost. No one else seems to notice, but that key is yours. You begin to call it silently our key. Weeks pass. Snow piles gently outside the chapel windows. You go about your duties, gathering berries, sewing hems, attending your mother during visits to the infirm and elderly. And yet no moment stays with you like that final minute of choir, when Mikhail lifts his voice, and though the text is always the same, makes the words feel new. He chooses slightly different embellishments each time. One week he stretches a melisma. The next he leans into a dissonance that resolves not toward tradition, but toward beauty. You begin to collect the scraps of memory as if they were lace threadbare delicate, but too precious to discard. You begin writing them down, not the notes which you do not know how to transcribe, but the feelings they cause. A journal slowly fills with your interpretations of his voice. Today the note lingered like dew. He smiled slightly after the cadenza. Was that hesitation in the last measure? This is how you fall in love in a world where to speak is to be accused of pride, where desire must take the shape of piety to be permitted even a whisper. You cannot even stand near him without a chaperone, yet your connection grows stronger than proximity would allow. It's not only in the music itself. One day after choir, you find a hymn sheet slipped into your pew. It is meticulously hand-copied ink, dark and careful, and in the corner a small mark, a faint cross surrounded by tiny circles. You don't recognize it as a liturgical symbol. It's personal. Not a signature exactly, but a signature of feeling. The hymn itself is the same as always, but he's transposed it slightly higher, more tender. You know it's from him. You tuck it beneath your mattress, and in the nights that follow, you take it out to trace the lines by candlelight. His music becomes your secret prayer. In rural Russia during this time, girls like you were often engaged by 17, married by 18, mothers by 19. But the daughters of priests had peculiar expectations, placed upon them more learning, more virtue, more visibility, and more eyes watching. It made impropriety nearly impossible, which is precisely why music became so vital. It was the one form of expression that could not be easily censored, and so it is with you and Mikhail. You learn to read the spaces between notes like others read eyes. A ritardando slowing the tempo becomes a pause of longing. A sudden crescendo feels like a burst of bravery. He never speaks, but you understand. Historically, some of the most beloved Orthodox hymns still performed today are believed by musicologists to contain deeply personal subtext. There's even speculation that one enduring Easter chant may have originated from a monk's unspoken grief over a lost love. The tradition of hiding meaning within sacred forms was widespread, though rarely acknowledged aloud. You wonder if Mikhail knows this lineage, or if he simply stumbled into it because his heart needed a language. Then comes the week before Lent, when services grow longer and more solemn. That Sunday the chapel is full. Incense coils thick in the air, and the choir's robes seem darker under candlelight. You sense something in the way Mikhail stands more upright, more deliberate. And when he leads the hymn, your hymn, you feel it. He has rewritten it. It is unmistakable now. A new bridge between the stanzas, a shift to a key that had never belonged in that piece before. But it fits. It elevates. It glows, and you feel yourself smiling before you realize it. It is more than a message. It is a confession. And yet, nothing changes outwardly. You leave with your mother as always, your scarf tied tightly against the wind. He does not follow. He never would. That would break the sacredness of it all. No, this is not the kind of love that lives in parlors or under wedding veils. Not yet, but you carry it with you. Into spring, into the season of new flowers and songs sung outdoors. Each time the choir sings the hymn again, even in its older form, your mind hears his version. It has been etched into your memory like embroidery on white linen, quiet, meticulous, permanent. Years later, perhaps you will marry. Perhaps not. Perhaps you will live your life without ever once touching the boy whose voice held your name. And yet you will always know you were once loved by someone who crafted melodies in your honor, whose affection slipped into the spaces left untouched by words. And that you'll think was more than enough. For some love speaks in flowers, for others in glances. But for you in Tsarist Russia, it spoke in hymnals and harmonies, in a language no one else could hear but you. A secret scored across the sacred. And now, as the candle of this memory flickers low, the scene shifts not to a different key, but a different land entirely. You will leave the snowy steeples of Russia and move southward into the world of sand and stars. A temple flickers beneath a moonlit sky, and a girl stands beside a colonnade, listening for footsteps that never come but always hoping they might. Egypt awaits. The scent of incense from the Russian chapel lingers faintly in your mind, but it soon fades, replaced by the warm stone breath of a desert temple and the hush of wind stirring palm fronds in the distance. The calendar has turned back centuries now, and your life is no longer shaped by snow or song. Instead, you stand beneath the full moon in Ptolemaic Egypt, where Hellenistic customs brush gently against the enduring rhythm of the Nile. You are an acolyte of the temple, born of Egyptian lineage, raised to honor the old gods and trained in the ceremonies of both Isis and Serapis. But tonight, as with many nights before, your eyes drift, not to the altar, but across the courtyard, toward a figure cloaked in foreign cloth. He is not from your world. His tunic, though dusty, bears the cut of a Greek merchant. His beard is trimmed neatly in the style of Alexandria's scholars. And though his footsteps are measured, his eyes are restless. You have never spoken. You may never speak. But he appears every month precisely on the night of the full moon, always at the same hour, always near the same pillar, and always alone. You first noticed him during the festival of Koyak, when processions lit the night in honor of Osiris's renewal. Amid the music and flames, his gaze met yours across a veil of smoke. It did not linger long, just long enough. And since then, each moonrise has become a question. Will he return? He does. And so do you. You find reasons to pass through the courtyard more often now. A votive offering to place a lamp, to relight a tapestry, to adjust. And each time he is there, standing with the air of one waiting for something he cannot name. There are no winks, no gestures, no signals, not the overt signs of courtship you've heard about from the market girls. Only the quiet, patient presence of someone who listens without expecting a sound. This is a delicate time in Egypt's history. Though the Ptolemaic dynasty rules from Alexandria, many Egyptian traditions remain strong, especially in the priesthood. You, as a temple woman, are expected to be chaste, reserved, and bound to ritual. Interactions with outsiders, particularly Greeks, are viewed with suspicion, sometimes even disdain. Yet this man never disrupts, never crosses boundaries. He seems to understand the unspoken rules. And perhaps that is what makes your shared silence feel sacred. One night you find him tracing the hieroglyphs carved into the limestone wall. His fingers move gently as if learning the script by touch. You wonder if he knows what they say. Prayers for protection, invocations of Mot eternal balance. He looks up not at you but toward the moon, and you feel the echo of that glance, as if it were a bell rung inside your chest. Historians still debate the extent to which Egyptian temple women in this era were allowed personal freedom. Some suggest they lived almost monastically tied to divine service and separated from common life. Others argue that temple duties were compatible with a degree of autonomy, especially in urban centers where Greek and Egyptian norms mingled. What's clear, however, is that your role as an acolyte places you at the intersection of two worlds, ritual and reality, obedience and longing. And somewhere in that intersection stands this man. You never learn his name, but you begin to recognize his rhythms. He comes earlier during the winter months when the moon rises low over the horizon. He lingers longer during festivals, though always just outside the ceremonial boundary. One night, as you carry a jug of water from the sacred well, you hear a small chime, a ceramic bead striking stone. You glance down and find it nestled by your sandal, a blue amulet shaped like a lotus. You do not pick it up, not immediately. That would be too obvious. Instead, you finish your duties. But later, when the courtyard is empty and the lamps are dim, you return. It's still there waiting. You lift it gently and hold it to your chest. It smells faintly of myrrh. There are no words exchanged, not even in writing. But from that night on, he no longer comes empty-handed. Sometimes he leaves behind small, curious offerings, a dried fig, a shell from the coast, a scrap of parchment with lines of Homer penned in a careful hand. Each gift is placed where only you will find it, always hidden in plain sight. And you in turn begin to respond not with gifts, but with actions. One evening you leave the oil lamp burning longer than needed, casting light where he usually stands. Another time you arrange a pattern of flower petals on the threshold, subtle, decorative, but unmistakably new. Among the Greeks in Alexandria, it was not uncommon for courtship to take literary form. In fact, fragments of love poems from this period still survive carved into stone walls or written in ink on potsherds. But for temple women like you, whose language is symbol and gesture, the body itself becomes the parchment. The tilt of your head, the choice of your route, the pause before entering a corridor, all these become lines in a dialogue, written without speech. One evening, as the wind carries coolness from the Nile, you pause beside a column and look up. There he is once again, but this time holding a small bundle, something wrapped in cloth. He does not move. He simply lays it at the base of the pillar and walks away, disappearing into the shadowed colonnade. You wait a long time before crossing the courtyard, your footsteps softened by the sand. When you finally unwrap it, your breath catches. It is a tiny sculpture stone, smooth-shaped like the ibis of Thoth god, of writing and knowledge. On its base there's a faint etching, not in Greek, but in Egyptian script. It reads simply, "I see you," and that more than any scroll or speech becomes your keepsake, a token of a connection that never asked to be fulfilled, only to be witnessed. Quirky detail. Some Ptolemaic-era temples included spaces designed specifically for sacred dream incubation, where seekers would sleep in hopes of receiving divine messages. You begin to wonder if your meetings are not dreams of that kind. After all, what is love, if not a quiet revelation? In time, the Greek man stops appearing. You do not know why. Trade routes shift. Perhaps he returned to the coast, or married in his own land. Perhaps he was never truly there, only passing through your life, like moonlight over stone. But the absence does not hurt, because you were never promised anything. And in a world shaped by boundaries, you were given something rarer than possession. You were given mutual regard. The ibis sculpture stays with you, not displayed, but tucked inside a pouch worn beneath your robes. On nights when the temple is still and the sky shines with the same fullness that marked your first encounter, you slip it into your hand and smile. You were seen. You were understood. And now, as the sands of Egypt settle, and time once again begins to shift, another world rises from the eastern hills. This time your path takes you to a land of mountains, and ink where metal and poetry intertwine. Bronze mirrors glint beneath silken sleeves, and a girl etches her heart into polished glass. China awaits. The Nile's hush fades, and now you find yourself breathing in the cool mountain air of ancient China. The walls surrounding you are no longer made of limestone, but of finely hewn timber, and polished stone lacquered in red, and glinting with patterns of dragons and clouds. It is the twilight of the Tang dynasty, and you are a mirror maker's daughter, well trained in your father's meticulous craft, but quietly yearning for something beyond alloy and surface. You spend your days casting bronze into circles of reflected light, pouring and polishing, rubbing and refining until each mirror gleams with the clarity of truth and perhaps hidden meaning. You've always loved how a mirror can lie. Not the polished metal itself, no, it reflects what stands before it. But it also hides the soul behind the eyes, keeps secrets tucked just beneath the shimmer. And it's that shimmer you've learned to shape. Every mirror you make carries your handprint, invisible to the buyer, but unmistakable to you. Sometimes it's the tiniest variation in rim thickness. Sometimes a faint ripple at the edge. But lately you've begun adding something else, something bolder. Along the underside of each mirror you inscribe a line of verse, always just one, short, soft, never your name, never a clue, just a feeling caught in words. You know he sees them, the scholar who returns every few weeks, always with a polite smile, always asking to see the unfinished stock. He pretends to examine the luster, the balance of the disc, but he holds them long enough to turn them over. Read the words and maybe understand. He never comments, never asks who wrote them, never even buys the finest mirrors. No, he always selects the flawed ones. The slightly dented rim, the imperfect, cast the mirror with just a hint too much copper. The ones no other customer wants. And you know why. The verses you've etched are for him. The words are drawn from the classics Li Bai Du Fu, sometimes your own timid lines. The moon returns, though we do not. Ink runs where silence begins. One glance, a lifetime, just fragments. But the moment he holds each mirror, the moment he lets his fingertips brush the cold underside before nodding and placing it gently back down, something in you warms. This is not flirtation, not even courtship. It's a communion, one held across polished metal and borrowed verse. Historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, 7th or 10th centuries, bronze mirrors were not just functional items. They were cultural artifacts, often inscribed with poetry or auspicious symbols. Some were even gifted as tokens of affection or remembrance, especially among the educated elite. The backs of mirrors frequently bore decorative inscriptions, and in private circles it wasn't uncommon for craftsmen, or those in their households, to embed personal meaning in the design. Mirrors were also symbolic of self-examination and inner clarity, making them a fitting medium for expressions of hidden emotion. You still remember the first mirror you inscribed. You were 16, uncertain and aching for something unnamed. The words had come to you while watching the rain strike the stone path outside your workshop. Even the drops know how to fall together. It had felt foolish, even childish, but you'd etched it quickly and lightly beneath the raised plum blossom design on the back. When that mirror sold, your stomach had turned. But 2 weeks later, the buyer returned the scholar and asked for more. That was when you began to write more intentionally. Your father suspects nothing. He thinks your mirrors sell because you are careful with alloy ratios, and your polish work is consistent. And it's true you are good at your craft. But the scholar does not return for balance or finish. He returns for the poetry and perhaps for you. Still, you do not speak. It would be improper, even dangerous. You're of artisan stock, and he walks the path of the literati. Though Tang society allowed certain minglings across class, the boundaries of marriage and romance were sharply drawn. A match like yours would be unthinkable, even laughable. Besides, you're not even sure you want it to go further. What you have is delicate gossamer spun between mirrors and margins. To pull at it would risk tearing it altogether. Tidbit. A rare legend from this period tells of a mirror maker who inscribed riddles in her work and attracted the attention of a palace eunuch, who secretly solved each puzzle and returned the mirrors with new riddles etched into ivory combs. Though no records confirm the tale, its endurance hints at the subtle forms of emotional exchange that bloomed in societies where open declarations were impossible. You sometimes wonder if you're living out such a legend yourself, one quiet verse at a time. Then one day he brings a mirror of his own. It's wrapped in silk carefully. You recognize your own work in the shape and casting, but the etching along the base is not yours. He lays it before you and says only, "This one was returned to me by someone I admire." And then he leaves. You unwrap the cloth. The mirror is tarnished slightly, perhaps from travel, but the line is clear. The bronze remembers what lips dare not. You press your fingers to the script. It's your style, but not your line. You don't understand until you see tucked inside the folds of the cloth a scrap of mulberry paper with one final poem. I have read each mirror like a letter. May this be my reply. You close the workshop early that day. What happens next is not dramatic. There is no runaway carriage, no clandestine marriage, no poetic reunion. He does not return. You do not send word. But the next mirror you make you keep for yourself. On its underside you etch. Some verses are meant to be reread alone. Years pass. You continue your craft, your hands growing stronger, your eyes sharper. Other buyers come and go. Some notice your etchings, some don't. A few scholars remark on the quality, the subtlety, but none return like he did. And eventually you stop inscribing poems, not out of sorrow, but because you no longer need to say what was already understood. Historians still argue whether women in artisan households during the Tang Dynasty had real artistic agency. While some records describe female painters, musicians and poets, most names are lost to time, and surviving works were often credited to men. Yet mirrors, especially those produced in family workshops, offer clues. The presence of irregular inscriptions, private messages, and romantic symbolism suggests that at least in some households, women found ways to shape not only the object, but the message it carried. You live a quiet life. Your father passes your younger cousins take over the outer shop, and you retire to a back room filled with tools and silence. But now and then, when the weather is soft and the light hits a certain way, you pull out that one mirror, the one he returned, and let it catch the sunset. You don't read the line anymore. You don't need to. Because in the reflection you still see his eyes. Not in detail, not as they truly were, but in the shimmer of meaning that hung between you. You were heard. You were replied to. And in a world where so much must be spoken to be believed, You found a love that asked for no confirmation. As twilight deepens over Luoyang and temple bells begin their slow cadence, you place the mirror back in its cloth and tuck it into the chest with the others. You have made many mirrors. Some now hang in noble homes. Some are lost to time. But this one remains. The bronze remembers. And from that glint of memory, your story now bends toward a firelit hearth, where an old woman smiles beside her husband of decades. You will meet her shortly. But for now, allow yourself to breathe in the final hush of China's fading golden age, before the soft glow of memory carries us home. Years have passed, and now the world around you has quieted. The bustling streets of London are far behind you, and the seasons have softened into a familiar rhythm. You are no longer a young girl pressing flowers into poetry books, or blushing beneath parasols. You are Lillian Wexley, now wife-mother, perhaps even grandmother. Yet you still sit in the very parlor where it all began. The same lace curtains catch the golden light in the late afternoon. The same grandfather clock ticks away in its steady cadence. The only difference is the warmth of the hand that rests in yours. Edward's hand, steady-lined but still unmistakably his. The same hand you held for the first time on your wedding day. The same one that trembled just slightly when it reached for yours in that quiet chapel so long ago. You don't speak much these days. You don't need to. Most evenings pass in comfortable silence. 2 chairs angled toward the fireplace, a pot of tea growing cool on the side table. Sometimes you'll read. Sometimes he'll hum a tune he's long forgotten the words to. But always without fail your fingers remain intertwined. Not with passion, not with urgency, but with the kind of quiet understanding that only comes after a lifetime of shared seasons. And in that touch simple, unremarkable, you find every unspoken word that once passed between you. It started, you remember, with a glance. A moment in Kensington Gardens, when the air still smelled like spring, and your mother's voice was fading into the breeze. That single look, full of possibility and trembling risk, carried more weight than any sonnet. It was not grand, nor cinematic, but it stayed with you. And in the months that followed, love bloomed not through stolen kisses or whispered confessions, but through a tilt of the head, a bouquet on the windowsill, the aching thrill of a waltz, where only your gloves brushed for a breath of a second. You learned to read each other's silences, to trust in implication, to find excitement, not in rebellion but in restraint. You often wonder now if that made your love any less real. The world today spins so quickly, touch is easy. Words are thrown like petals, and intimacy comes before trust has even had time to take root. Young people fall in love in days and fall apart even faster. They swipe and scroll and meet and vanish, chasing sparks and losing substance. And yet when you look at Edward's hand in yours, you know what you had was not lacking. It was slow. It was uncertain. But it was deep. It endured. And somehow by the time you touched, you already knew. Historical fact. Victorian courtship norms dictated that a man and woman could not be alone together without a chaperone until a formal engagement was declared. Touching, be it holding hands, a brush of the arm, or even prolonged eye contact, was subject to scrutiny and disapproval, especially for women. A single step outside propriety could compromise not only a woman's reputation, but her entire family's standing. This rigid decorum shaped how affection was expressed, and often made the emotional undercurrents far more potent. It's why gestures like a dropped glove or a coded fan movement could carry the weight of a confession. You remember the fan, how you spent hours selecting just the right one for the charity ball. White lace with an ivory handle delicate enough to be noticed, but not so elaborate as to appear vain. You studied the language of the fan from etiquette guides. To hold it closed, and to the left meant disinterest. To open it slowly facing the heart was invitation. That night in the center of the Bloomsbury ballroom, You opened it just once and saw him look. And in that moment you were certain, not because of what he said. He never said much, but because you had learned together how to speak without speaking, how to fall in love without ever brushing a cheek or whispering a vow. That intimacy, born of patience and precision, lasted far beyond the ceremony, the honeymoon, the childbearing years. It followed you into the small fights over teacups, the nights spent worrying over bills, the griefs that stole your breath, and the joys that stitched you back together. You were never theatrical. You were never the envy of gossips, but you were real. And what surprises you now is that the feeling has not faded. Even after all this time, after the wrinkles and the aches, and the long quiet stretches, where you barely recognize your own reflection, when he glances at you across the room, that same glint is still there. Not passion, perhaps, not longing, but presence. He sees you, still, tidbit. Some Victorian couples maintained a custom of writing each other letters, even after marriage, slipping notes beneath teacups, or tucking them into coat pockets. These were not long declarations, but simple lines. I saw you laughing today. Your hand brushed mine, and I remembered. Small reminders that even in marriage, the act of noticing still mattered. Edward wrote to you once after your third child was born. Just a few lines scribbled on the back of a receipts book left on your pillow. You were luminous today, even when you were exhausted. I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful that you tilted your parasol. You cried when you read it, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. You had made that choice subtle, bold, and everything followed. Now, as the fire crackles low, and the mantel clock ticks gently toward bedtime, you squeeze his hand. He doesn't need to look to know what it means. He squeezes back, and together without a word you rise. The lamps are dimmed, the teacups cleared. The day ends just as all your days have, in soft silence, with presence and peace. Historians still debate whether Victorian love was stifled or strengthened by restraint. Some argue that emotional repression harmed romantic development. Others suggest that by slowing the pace, couples developed a deeper foundation of trust and respect. The answer likely varies with each story, but in yours, Lillian, there is no question. Yours is a love that grew not from fiery declarations or scandalous rendezvous, but from stillness, from glances, from a walk 2 steps apart. And in that space you found each other, entirely. And so, as the candle is blown out and the shadows settle, you close your eyes. The memories are not loud. They do not demand retelling, but they remain quiet as pressed violets, clear as mirror silver, and lasting as the first glance you never forgot. Because as it turns out, love that never needed to touch was never fragile. It was simply waiting for a lifetime. And now, as the fire within your mind's hearth begins to settle, you let your breath slow just a little. The echoes of Lillian's silent courtship, of gentle glances and unspoken understandings begin to fade into the soft hush of night. You've walked alongside her through gardens shaded in spring mist, heard the faint scratch of ink on anonymous letters, and felt the aching joy of a hand held for the very first time, not in haste but in honor, and all without a single kiss. Isn't it curious how restraint can deepen the well of affection? How choosing patience over immediacy can allow a feeling to root so deeply it weathers every storm and silence that follows. In an age where everything is hurried, messages instant, declarations loud, perhaps there's something profoundly comforting about a time when love was built, slowly, carefully, with an eye not just to passion, but to permanence. As your thoughts drift between past and present, between imagined lace gloves and a real blanket drawn gently under your chin, you may find yourself reflecting not only on history, but on your own quiet moments, on the smiles you've shared across rooms, on the letters you once tucked into drawers, or the glance that lingered longer than it should have. And in that hush, you realize love never needed to be loud to last. Tonight, may your dreams be filled with soft-footed promenades, whispered violins, and the kind of love that waits, listens, and endures. You are safe now and still. The story is done, the candle is low, and history has wrapped its arms around you like a lullaby. Sleep well, dear listener. You are not alone. End of script. Sweet dreams.